Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm so sorry that I was late. It was really rainy out there on the highway. I just came in from the Fraser Valley. So, my name's Kerry Coast. I was born here. Hi. Oh, really? That was you? No, I'm just kidding. I was born here in British Columbia, beyond the treaty frontier. I have a Canadian passport. Hi, I've seen you for a while. And so what I really want to talk about tonight is the situation that Indigenous peoples are in British Columbia, in this sort of renegade state, really, this colony of British Columbia, and the way that the people are made to be terrorists in their own homeland, which is the way that the state is part of one of the tools that the state uses to justify itself, and it turns the language around on us. But before I really get started, I just want to say thank you very much to Red Sparks, and thanks very much to Suzanne and Martha. And I really want to acknowledge how humbling it is to speak alongside people who have been criminalized for who they are. For me, as a white person living in British Columbia, I haven't had that experience, and it's not easy. I know people who have had that experience, and that's why I'm talking to you tonight. Why am I up here talking about Indigenous people's struggles in British Columbia? Obviously, I'm not an Indigenous person. I married in to the Mount Currie community, otherwise known as Lilwat, and the person that I married there is somebody who was constantly targeted by the cops and by the state. And I want to remark on the terror list, because we have a different kind of terror list within Canada. And it's not, they don't actually have the names of organizations and people there. It's kind of more of a secret list, but I'll get to that in a minute. My partner in Mount Currie, the person I fell in love with, and this is one of our greatest tools, is to fall in love with somebody from somewhere else in the world, and you get to realize how great it is to be a human being, and that we're all human beings, and we all deserve to be human beings. I'm going to get back to that as well. So why did the cops target Naldo? Because he was a road blocker. He blocked roads, access roads leading to places where people wanted to log the smallpox burial grounds. He roadblocked when the province wanted to increase their highway running straight through his community. And so he was on that secret list. And the cops would pick him up for no particular reason or for any reason they could think of and bring him into jail, and they really would beat the shit out of him. He would come back from jail with stitches, with concussions, and we need to understand that here in British Columbia, this is part of the reality that Indigenous individuals face when they do resist. When they do resist the idea that this is Canada and Canadian law is paramount, and for all you Indigenous people, you can have the Indian Act. A piece of legislation which is on a par with the Catholic laws of the 19th century in Ireland, or the Poor laws, or I'm sure you could fill in for me there, and that. So people who resist that and say, no, we're not Canadian, we're Lilwat, or we're Shkwatmik, or we're Wet'suwet'en, or whoever that is standing up, and they say, no, we're not part of your state, we are who we are. We don't want you to log our water area. We need to drink water, we need to survive here. These people become terrorists. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about an example from 1995. So just to check in, I think I'd like to know, if I say that I'm going to talk about Gustafsen Lake, can you just put up your hand if you know exactly where I'm going with that? Nice shirt. Right on. Okay. Yeah, okay, so good. So maybe half the crowd, was that right? I have a real head cold, so I'm trying to really stay on topic. Okay, 1995, Gustafsen Lake. The people wanted to do a Sundance. They wanted to do it on sacred ground where 7 different Sundance chiefs had all independently found that same location in Secwepemc territory. They all set out to find the site of the next Sundance location, and they all arrived at exactly the same place. That's where the Sundance was going to be. So they held it for a couple of years, and then the cattle rancher who ranges his cows out there got fussy, and he got fussed, and he started fussing with the cops, and they fussed together, and they refused to come to the Sundancers meetings to discuss and make plans for the 1995 Sundance. And instead of meeting with them, the rancher named Lyle James refused to meet with them, and sent a document saying that the RCMP had validated his claim that he owned that particular land that the Sundance was being held on. Well, okay, so just to be clear, Lyle James did not own that property. Lyle James had a cattle grazing permit to have his cows range on that area where the Sundance ceremony was going to happen. You do not need a Ministry of Forest and Range cattle grazing permit to let your cows out on your own property. Okay, so Lyle James did not own the property, and yet that was the thing that the media all told us. Oh, these people are trespassing. They're doing mischief on private property. So what happened there? Okay, the Sundancers were camped. The ranchers and the cops obviously were involved in escalating the situation. We know that now. And so some of the cowboys went out there and ran over people's tents or strung up eviction notices, saying it was a good time to string up. Anyway, I really don't feel like repeating what they said. Really provocative. And so ultimately, the Sundancers had a legal request. They wanted to have a third-party, independent, impartial tribunal hear their claim that they had never made a treaty with Canada, they had never sold the land to Canada. That's what they wanted. They went to the United Nations. They met with special rapporteurs in the United States in Washington State when they came traveling around. They filed a petition. They sent it to the Attorney General of British Columbia. They sent it to the Queen. They did all these channels. And what was the Canadian state's response to their legal argument? Well, it wasn't to meet them in court. It wasn't to reply to their petition. It wasn't to engage the United Nations and say, okay, you can be a third party. We agree we have a problem with these Secwepemc people right here. We need a third party to hear it. No, that was not their response. What was their response? Their response was to surround the Sundancers with 300 cops, 6 armored personnel carriers in the largest ground assault since the Korean War, and rained 77,000 rounds of ammunition on their heads. The fact that none of them was killed is nothing short of a miracle. So we're talking about 20 people in a camp, and the most sophisticated military post that they had was a foxhole, which is, when you have a big tree, you could dig down under the roots so that you can hide under the tree. Gives you some shelter and you can see. So we're talking about 300 police officers, 77,000 rounds of ammunition, such that when the cops collected up the spent shells after this siege, they had 2 piles of emptied shells, which just about reached the ceiling. So the amount of ammunition that they discharged there was the cops themselves would phone home, and our friends who were in 100 Mile near Gustafsen Lake, checking on our friends, the cops were also there using the same payphones, and the cops would be in disbelief. We ran out. They're calling for more ammunition. The guys were shell shocked. The cops themselves were absolutely thunderstruck. So this is the thing. And what did they call these people? 3 guesses. It starts with T and rhymes with terrorism. Yeah, so they called them terrorists, and I have here a file which I was sort of bringing out when we talked about this yesterday, and I was flipping through all these news article headlines, the physical news headlines from 1995, and in the headlines, what did it say? Militants, thugs, rebels, insurgents, rebellion, terrorists. One of the headlines was AG gives green light to shoot to kill terrorists. So no longer were these people Sundancers conducting a sacred ceremony. No longer were they Secwepemc sovereigntists with a very legitimate, some would say true, legal argument. I would say that. I'm sorry, it's my head cold. So they can't respond to the legal argument. They can't, create amnesty or shelter or refuge for the people having a sacred ceremony. No, they try to kill them. So the use of the word terrorist is incredibly important in that formula, because the cops needed to convince the public that the only solution was to kill these people. And in order to manufacture that understanding among the public of British Columbia, which it did quite successfully, there was all kinds of people marching up and down the town in 100 Mile near Gustafsen Lake with big signs saying, "We support the RCMP, end it now." So they did. They had public support to completely assassinate those people in that lake. And they did it by manufacturing the concept that these people were terrorists and militants and rebels and thugs who could not be negotiated with and were not making any sense, which is the furthest thing possible from the truth. And what did those people say? They refused. I have 5 minutes, everybody. Keep an eye on me. They refused. No, I totally want to respect that because we have some really important discussion today. The people in the camp refused to leave. They knew they were standing on the right. They knew that they were standing on Secwepemc territory. And they said, look, here's all the cops surrounding us. We're not going. The only way we're coming out of here is in body bags. Now, what they were saying is that we're a free people. We want to be here. We want to be who we are and do what we do, and we're going to stand up for that. And if we can't be who we are and we can't do what we do, we don't want to live anyway. So just shoot us. Just shoot us. We're not going anywhere. If that's all you got, then just shoot us now. And that's what Wolverine said. He said the only way we're coming out of here is in body bags. Luckily, his mind was changed. But we've had the same thing all over the world. People can only take so much, and at some point they stand up, and like we saw on the media, on the YouTube coming from the East Coast right now, a few days ago, the guys were the guys were trying to block their road and not allow the government to use the territory for fracking in Mi'kmaq. And so they're like, no, we're going to stand here. Thanks very much. We made a treaty with Great Britain, and you guys said you're going to look after the land for us. Well, thanks, but we're going to look after it now. Like, we've had enough of that. You're taking care of the land for us. Thank you. And the guys, they stood up and they went out on the road to protect their clean water. And you can see on that YouTube video, the guys were like, here's the cops with their dogs popping out of the forest, and then there's a lineup of cops, and then the ERT comes in, and the guys are like, shoot me. Just go ahead, just shoot me. I am not going to live on my knees. If what happens when I stand up is that you shoot me, then get it over with. And that's what these people are saying. And these are the people that the media and the state are calling terrorists. They're not terrorists. And Indigenous people all over the world, when they stand up for their own land and their own place, this is what happens. The media and the state concocts a story saying these people are terrorists. 1982 in Guatemala. All of a sudden, here's people living in their villages up in the mountains. All of a sudden, the army comes in and is shooting everybody. I know people who escaped Guatemala by running ahead of them through the bush. And they're like, we don't know what's going on. Like, they were just running because behind them, everybody was getting shot. So they just kept running until they made it to Mexico. And they found out later that the Guatemalan government had told everybody that they were terrorists. They were just Indigenous people living in the bush the way they had always lived. In Guatemala, that happened. In New Zealand, they introduced legislation called the Terror Act or some crap like that. The Terrorism Suppression Act. The New Zealand government created this. And then what did they do once they'd created this legislation? They started busting into Maori people's houses and busting them under the new terror suppression legislation. So this is the tool that is used around the world, and it's really important for all of us to stand up for each other in terms of where we live and be who we are and to have that sovereignty. We don't want to live in a world which is run by states which, can accommodate or deny a UN resolution depending on whether it's convenient for people who want to ship oil through that region. We've got to get a lot more proactive than that. I happen to believe that we can use the United Nations in some way, but you kind of end up being a political football, and I think that that's something that deserves more discussion as well. But I didn't want to stop before mentioning that the story that I really wanted to relate to you about Gustafsen Lake in 1995, I've said that now, and that's what happened here. We really need to be aware of that. We should have a public inquiry into that event. But I want to end on this note for our next speaker, which is that the headline in the Vancouver Sun the other day was Enbridge Pipeline has to deal with hostiles. Like, when was the last time we heard people called hostiles? Like, this is from the Wild West. Like, this is the hostiles. And they're talking about Indigenous people. And that was the headline, hostiles in the way of the Enbridge pipeline. So this is the language, and this is what is used to manufacture consent, to kill people. But we really need to crack that, and we really need to never be fooled by that again. We need to stand up for each other. We're not terrorists, we're people, and we're people all over the world. And so, that should be your first clue. Next time you want to join a movement, make sure that it's a terrorist movement, because then that's the grassroots people. These are the peaceful people, right? Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and I'm looking forward to our next speakers.